Okay, so let's start. Okay, welcome everyone and welcome you all to our event, Critical Curatorial Practices in the 21st Century. The subtitle for the event is Public Space, New Media, and Geopolitics. This event is part of our center's project, okay, our center's sub-project 6, okay, of ICCS is artistic intervention and social engagement. It is also part of our Trans-Asia Research Network event, Trans-Asia Research Network, TARM. That is a platform we built up from North East Asia to Southeast Asia to South Asia and maybe elsewhere, Europe. And we have colleagues from South Korea, Hong Kong, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, not yet, Singapore, Australia, and so on. So the purpose of our building up this platform is to try to engage or to facilitate more dialogue and more exchange of our thought. Colin, what did you say? Is there anything wrong, Colin? It's okay. I'll continue. So
yeah, no, sorry, it wasn't.
Huh? That's okay. Okay. All right. Anyway, let's come back to this very brief introduction. So why do we do this? We want to do this and think how curatorial practices can be done differently in the 21st century or have to be different, okay, for today. So how can curatorial practices engage with our contemporary societies because it has been drastically changed? And how can artists redefine museum space as such? Okay, how do they make the space as a site of experiment, a site of laboratorial practices, or for alternative classroom? And how do they, actually each one of our speakers today also, how do they reorient their audience spatial experience and let them into a different world through their curation or their choreography? And how do they retake the public space and activate the processes of communication with a local or with the audience or with a broader world? And how do they employ various media? So apparently we are dealing with much more different media than before, than 20 years ago or a century ago. And how do they also practice their curatorial project politically? How do they propose their thesis? We know in every art, every piece of drama, dance, or music, not to mention literary work or theoretical essays, there always would be a thesis, a point to make. Okay, so how do they do it? How do our artists here do it? Okay, so I'm so happy to introduce to you the three remarkable artist scholars Lai Wen-Shu and Karen Ong and Swaito Patel. I'll introduce them one by one, okay, so that I can go into details. I start from Lai Wen-Shu. Wen-Shu Lai, she's currently the chair and also a professor at the Institute of the Applied Art of our university. Okay, also our research fellow at the center. And she led this interrogative trans art lab. And also she has been working on this 6 fuel factory team for a long time. Okay, we all visited there almost every year. And we were all impressed to see how the whole thing grew very organically with the community, and how many diverse aesthetic work can be possible and can be active under her hands. And Lai Wen-Shu, she earned her MA and MFA degree in art and design, and then doctoral degree in art education from the University of Iowa. Before she came back to Taiwan, she taught at Angelo State University, right, Texas. And her work has been awarded by different places, quite a lot. Okay, so I will give her the time, and she will be just sharing with us her work and maybe also her philosophy. Okay, every one of us has our own philosophy in doing something. So Wen-Shu, the floor is yours, please. You can start share screen.
Okay, thank you for Josie's introduction, and it's very a pleasure to share my curation and art making tonight. Today, I would like to talk about interactive design as a social intervention and curational methods. Okay, we all know since 1990 is a curatorial term, and for me, curation is a tactics. I would just talk a little bit how I'm related to this. I think exhibitions are the main means through which contemporary art is now mediated, experienced, and historicized. So curating is a tactics, which means this may either be a compensatory device or a politicized attempt to consider works of art as interrelated rather than as individual entities, or a textual response to changes in the art world itself. So for me, I'm an artist, but I'm also an art educator, curator, and researcher. The artist curator curate in a sense, like the artist make work. So he or she consequently question the very act of curating and exhibition making. For example, I often play multiple roles at the same time in exhibition making or performance production, including artist, curator, researcher, designer, and producer, etc. So to me, interactive design is a method for art making, social intervention, and curating. And I'm going to give a little introduction. What is interactive design? interactive design initiated by Harvard University professor Christopher Wusko. It is a method for investigating social or political issues, raising critical inquiries instead of solving problems. Through entering public space, taking artistic action, and using people or things as living metaphors to transform specific sites into metaphorical space. In other words, speakers, spaces, and tools serve as intermediary media to interact with participants or audience and initiate dialogue through intermediary mechanisms. Therefore, as a method of strategy, the interactive design conveys information through cross-disciplinary integration, such as multimedia projection, interactive installation, or curating. The purpose is not to provide solutions, but to raise or reveal problems behind social or political phenomena. The praxis of interactive design could be seen as a curatorial method or approach, an attitude, a critical action, or a social intervention, thus bringing about the conditions of the invisible or the marginal voices to be seen or heard, and triggering follow-up and discussion. So Joyce asked me, how do I use this method to conduct interventional artistic action, targeting history and the contemporary society? What are the forms of curating works? Why is this done? So I think I would like to talk a little bit how I grew up in Taiwan. I was born and grew up when Taiwan was still under martial law. It's from 1949 to 1987. So education during that time actually is at all levels was a means to serve political ideology, a tool used by a Chinese nationalist party to brainwash and control. In 1987, Taiwan's martial law was lifted, and Taiwan's transition to democracy slowly began. However, people are used to remain silent, and fearless speech is not easy for most people after a 30-year-long martial law governance. For me, conformity and non-conformity are two contradictory forces constantly wrestling inside me. So raising question is something I do to figure out puzzles in my head. After I moved back to Taiwan in 2005, and 2 years later, I curated my own first solo exhibition at the university. And the title of the exhibition is The Unfinished Images. And here I'm going to read a paragraph written by Professor Lin Ziming. He's a professor and an art critic. And he said, when we talk about the unfinished images, there will be some kind of inner contradiction because an image, especially when it is taken by a camera, is always already finished in some way, even if it is subjecting to some degree of modifiability. So now, how can an image be unfinished? Where hide the power that make it interminable? What is the secret of its openness? So those are questions that are raised by Professor Lin after he saw my exhibition. So I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about this exhibition, and it's also how I respond to the aesthetic question raised by Professor Lin. For me, art is actually limbo. So there is no beginning and there is no end. And I always consider my art is personal, historical, political, conceptual, and ontological. So what you see on the screen actually is one of the pieces that I shown in the exhibition. And so I will read a paragraph that I embedded in the picture. Follow the imagery backwards at least to the point at which they disappear into the limbo of the subconscious, or the unconscious, or the instinctive, or the merely biology. So that's why I say my art is ontological. And this is another series of shadow sculpture that I show in my first solo exhibition. And you can see on the screen, the red one is a real sculpture that I made. But after that, I start to shooting picture of the shadow from the sculpture. And so when you see the shadow of a sculpture, and the shadow will change constantly, depends on where the light comes from, and which remind me that the meaning of the work will be shaped, revised, and recreated by the artist and its viewers' stories, rather than accept unthinkingly. So here is what I wrote and for this a series of shadow sculpture. How long does the shadow sculpture can last? It depends on the on and off switches of the projector. The meaning of the art and the work itself are ephemeral. So after the work disappears, the meaning is transported, shaped, revised, and recreated by the people's memory and stories. So to me, art as praxis, art as symbol, art as present, art as ontology, art as inquiry, and art as interrogation. And in 2017, I curate another exhibition. The title is Drawing from Dalai Lama, solo exhibition by Tomoyo Ihaya. And it's a series of drawing drawn for the self-immolation Tibetans. And since 2009, more than 160 Tibetans have self-immolated to protest against repression from the Chinese Communist government. So in this exhibition, I raised a few questions. And the first one is Tibetan self-immolation is a martyrdom or suicide. If it's a suicide, actually it's a violence action. So the second question that I ask is, should we interpret Ihaya's art series on Tibetan self-immolation from the perspective of Tibetan Buddhism? The third question, does self-immolation for protecting Buddhism counts as a bodhisattva state? Would the self-immolators meet the rebirth destiny of higher beings if they did not renounce their aversions? So those are very difficult questions, and I have done 2 years research for this exhibition before I really hold this exhibition. But I would like to emphasize interactive design as a method is to raise or discuss difficult questions or difficult history instead of offer an answer for the viewers. in 2019, I curated my second solo exhibition, Live from Within. Through 5 installations, I intended to invite the viewers to imagine what life could be. Is a spiritual life, is a physical life, or is something else? So instead of providing a fixed interpretation or point of view, I invite the viewers to think about the exhibition. And this exhibition actually is also inspired by the story of St. John of the Cross. Okay, so I'm just going to show you a few pictures of the exhibition. So you can see from the right, actually I create a space, and the viewer or the visitor can enter the space and stay inside, shut the door and stay inside, just have a dialogue of the light shining through the wall, it's like a crack of the wall, Okay. So this is the second piece, and this is the third piece. They are all large scale installation, and it's all about light. And this is a computer simulation. And in 2012, I have a third solo exhibition. And I forgot to mention that I always curate my own exhibition. So I'm the artist, and I'm also the curator. And this solo actually is about, I think it's very related to light, but I kind of extend the concept of light, through wrinkles. And so it's not just light, it's also about space and time. So now I'm going to show you a few pictures of the exhibition. And I spent about 2 years study fiber optics, and I experimented with making paper embedded the fiber optics. So all the material, all the pieces actually are related to fiber, to optical fiber, I mean. And here are some pictures of the exhibition. And in 2012, I have another solo exhibition, and I try to have a dialogue with Martin Heidegger. He has a book called Off the Beaten Tracks.
Wenshu, do you know we are limited to 30 minutes?
Yeah, so how?
Okay.
Maybe I'll just skip maybe this. I'll just show you the pictures, okay?
Okay, yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, so I think I will just briefly say that actually I changed the whole space of the gallery. I made a lot of reconstruction the whole space to create the forest that I would like to have to respond to Heidegger's of the beaten track. So you can see a lot of optical fibers were used for this exhibition. And ECG and respiration sensors are also used by the visitor. So they use their heartbeat and respiration to control the interaction of all the installations, including the forest on the second floor. And I think it's 2021, I have another solo exhibition. And this exhibition is Encounter Foreseeing the Sixth View Factory. And it's related to the project that I have been working for 60 years. And here the question I would like to ask or raise is, can art be an offering to a historical site? And that's what I meant to do for this exhibition. Okay. And then in 2019, I have the first documenta of the Sixth Fuel Factory. And I'm just show you a little bit of the clips. Okay, so from the clips, you can see there's a variety of work, multimedia work were included in the documenta. So here I raise a question that if a city without memory, and how can we know where we are coming from and where we are heading to? So this is a kind of the major concept for the first documenta. And in 2020, we have the second documenta for the Sixth Fuel Factory, and we emphasize the factory actually is in motion. And what does it mean in motion? Because we try to find a strategy how to transform the fuel factory into a museum. So the museum in motion, which actually means that there are several different ways to run a museum. For example, sustainable life, local texture, cultural heritage interpretation, governance strategy, historical writing, and then set up a museum paradigm. This is the kind of the major concept that we would like to deliver through the second documenta. And here we also, again, change the space of the gallery to convey the whole idea, museum in motion. And we also try to find another vehicle. Instead of written or performance, we also invite artists to make music and singing. So art making or performance is also an alternative historical writing. Okay, and this is one of my students. He created a very short documentary we call phone film to interpret what he thinks about the fuel factory. I think I'll just skip it. And in the same year, I also curate and produce the Sixth Fuel Factory Interactive Theater. And I also try to raise several questions to provoke the audience to think. The first one is, whose history? When we say we want to regenerate the historical site, we have to ask first, whose history, whose historic site, and how to regenerate, and by whom. And I think I'm going to show you the director of this piece. So this is the performance side. It's right in front of the Sixth Fuel Factory.
I'm Max Schumacher in German, and I'm the co-artistic director of a company called Post Theater. We have been invited to co-create here the performance Monuments, which I am also the theater director of and the author of the script for the production.
我相信你们今天和我们 有共同的热忱，要在这个地方将我们记忆中的这些事情变成一个活生生的博物馆。
The idea of the performance monuments is that the audience can create a monument. So in a democratic way, they are asked to think, design, and work on a fictional monument for Japan to commemorate the era of the Japanese colonialism in Taiwan.
他在讲的就是历史话语权。当我们有科技的时候，其实它赋予了我们每一个平民老百姓历史的书写权跟话语权。
So this performance have it's a teamwork. We work together for almost 18 months to make this happen. So the production team include the Post Theater IoT lab at Jiao Tong University and the Trans-R NYCU team. And the purpose is making a World War II monument, and also we use making monument to deal with the difficult history of Taiwan. And here is the location of the factory. Okay, so you can see that the audience use their smartphone to make a decision what kind of monument they would like to make. So this is a collective production, and both also is a collective historical writing. But there's a critical questions, you know, behind what the whole production. The first the question is, does monument really intend the audience to vote on their smartphone to build World War II monuments? Okay, this is the first question. And so let's skip to this. So this is the whole technical architecture. You can see we spend lots of time to develop the AI polling system. And so the audience can participate of creating the monument, but when they are doing this, they also have to reflect upon the history of Taiwan and make a conscious decision, you know, what message they would like to deliver through making of the monuments. So the audience began to think when monument juxtaposed to Hsinchu and World War II city, is it an attempt to reveal the historical birthmark of this city, or it is a self-questioning by raising this question to explore the city's self-definition or inquire the identification or identity as a citizen of Hsinchu, Taiwan. So if a World War II monument symbolized the end of the war, when the use of AI polling by the audience to build a so-called no monument or non-monument on site through smartphone, can it be regarded as initiate a debate? The second question, does such an approach call into question the monuments produced by dominant historical perspective? The third question, has the construction of the World War II monument in Taiwan empowered the audience to discuss and write public history alternatively? The last question, does the use of IoT talk technology to build digital monument transcended the scope of technology and the art, and enter the discussion of who can erect monument, who has the right to speak? Okay, so here is my shared my presentation today.
Thank you so much, Wenshu. It's so interesting each time I went through your work. It's so very touching. We'll leave the discussion toward the end. Okay. So let me introduce you with our second speaker, Karen Lee. Karen, she's a curator, a historian, and also currently chairing the Department of Art at Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. Okay, she received her MA from Stanford, MA from BA from Stanford, MA from Christie's New York, and PhD in the history, theory, and criticism of art and architecture from MIT. And where her dissertation focused on experimental new media practices in early reform era China. Karen has a very interesting, mysterious historical background, personal background. I say mysterious because I haven't figured out, but of course it's clear, but I'll talk to you more. She also is a curator at the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco, and she has exhibited her project. And recently, she also has worked on this curatorial programs at NTU CCA Singapore, and co-edited the book Southeast Asia, Contemporary Art in Southeast Asia. Okay, today she will be sharing with us her work, her thought on polyphony in practice, 复调实践. Okay, Karen, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much.
Yes.
All right, so I am showing my screen. I will just warn everyone that I will share the first few slides are mostly text and then the rest are mostly images, just because I think it's good to be prepared. I was hoping to spend a little bit of time thinking through some of these sort of interesting provocations that Joyce had started this convening with. Wenshu has already addressed many of them, so I will jump right in. So let's see. All right, so essentially I wanted to share my point of view as a practitioner. So this is relating to my vision and definition of a successful curatorial practice in the 20th century or 21st century, which of course draws from my own multiple identities or personalities in the realm of the space of the curatorial. As an art historian, as a curator of exhibitions, as a co-creator of artist projects, and as a keeper of museum collections. And I use that sort of British term keeper just to think very specifically around the politics of objects and how they are to be stewarded, kept, and in many ways made sort of more powerful through their interpretation, which is also a bit of a problem when we start to try to deconstruct these knowledge structures. More recently, I have shifted to not just curating and teaching on the side, but sort of flipping that equation where I am primarily teaching and curating in addition to that. So I'm a lecturer in both art history and museum studies, which is not always the same thing, not always compatible. In all of these roles, I try to consider how to meet the audience on common ground, which is in some ways the most difficult proposition when trying to evolve curatorial practice, either individually or collectively, beyond the authorial practices that rely upon specialized and often hard to access knowledge. So one quick note, the concept of museum studies that I would actually love your comments on at the end of my talk is something that I wanted to foreground because I do consider this a very important broad umbrella term that encompasses much more than the literal study of or for museums, to include the wider ecosystem of art making and viewing, which is indelibly colored by the cultures of collection, display, and knowledge production related to museums, and specifically historical museums. To position a curatorial approach or artistic practice within the context of institutional critique, which is, of course, how most significant modern or contemporary art movements and art events have been positioned for at least 150 years, is to implicitly engage with this longer history of official modes of knowledge production and narrative. So by extension, this is an engagement with the fields of philology, of anthropology, ethnology, art history, and history. So to declare oneself independent of these Eurocentric or at least patriarchal and hegemonic discourses is to delude oneself of the parameters that we have all inherited. In my own formation and training as a contemporary curator and art historian, I have tended to invite myself into spaces where I might not otherwise be invited. In so doing, I've gotten to know the contours and textures of the broader art world. At times, I feel like I've spent my career sort of peeking into worlds that are close but don't intersect. So public arts administration, which is something that I spent some time doing very early in my career as an intern at the Art Commission of the City of New York in the 1990s during the Rudolph Giuliani administration. We've all seen some of the sort of sad afterlives of Giuliani and his cohort from that era, which is very much the time of the culture wars in New York. The history of the art market and its relationship to connoisseurship, which is something that I looked at Christie's, where I did my MA in modern art history, not because I intended to spend my career in the art market, but because I feel like that's an important factor that is often not explicitly addressed in art or curatorial practices. Also in my multiple curatorial or paracuratorial roles as a museum educator, curator of artist residencies, researcher, and writer. I have worked in a gallery that, this is a commercial gallery in New York that was frequented by some of the most influential art critics of our time, which is perhaps the only place that I really intersected with those thinkers and writers. I've spent a lot of time in non-collecting exhibition making institutions, and then also in encyclopedic or specifically sort of Asian encyclopedic art museums in the United States with significant or in some cases rather insignificant collections. I've been a curator of temporary spaces and pop-up exhibitions. And above all, I can share these thoughts with you as someone who has been consistently working as both a content specialist and an administrator for 20 plus years. I say that because it's not to privilege my full-time institutional work as more significant than the independent and often undercompensated work of many of my peers in the field, but to emphasize the laborious nature of keeping cultural institutions afloat. In this type of year-round nonstop programming and exhibition environment, the domain of curators goes far beyond their areas of specialty to include writing and editing, not just curatorial text, but things like newsletters, grants, pitch decks, and press releases, fundraising, budgeting, program management and logistics, procurement, training, and specifically capability development, which is something that many institutions and many individuals don't take seriously enough, if you ask me. Working with designers, both graphic, spatial, and digital, and of course, many forms of hospitality. So I do realize that in this audience, those details pertaining to the other duties of a curator might be well understood, but I mention them as a way of getting at my larger point, which is that a successful curatorial practice is a contribution to an inclusive and collaborative ecosystem that goes beyond thought leadership or dynamic posturing. It involves hands-on problem solving. So without presuming to offer facile, smug, or simplistic answers to the complex provocations of this gathering, I'll start with a term that lately has helped me to think through my own multiple understandings of how to approach and sustain curatorial projects in our contemporary, complex, and decentered realm of exhibition making, which is polyphony. So I will start to explore the term polyphony and its close cousins, multivocality and polyvocality, which, polyphony is, of course, borrowed from the world of mostly Western musical theory. I'll use a few definitions in this case, starting with the sonic glossary, which is a teaching tool of the Columbia University musicologist Ian Bent. Polyphony is a musical texture that features two or more equally prominent melodic lines played at the same time. Each of these lines can be thought of as a melody in its own right, one that could be sung, played, or listened to independently of the others, but it is the combination of the different strands all interacting together that creates polyphony. Polyphony may be likened to a dialogue, a discussion, or even an argument between two or more speakers, all talking concurrently. As a result, polyphony may be judged as the most complex of all the musical textures, since it challenges a listener to concentrate on several equally important layers of sound. There is, of course, another very well-known metaphorical extension of these concepts, which is itself borrowing from the realm of literature and literary criticism. So most of you are likely aware of this literary use of the term polyphonic, which is very much associated with Mikhail Bakhtin and his treatment of Dostoevsky. So Dostoevsky's novels are a plurality of independent and unmerged voices and consciousness, a genuine polyphony of fully valid voices. His major characters are, by the very nature of his creative design, not only objects of authorial discourse, but also subjects of their own direct signifying discourse. So let's move to a slightly different way of thinking about the multiple voices that I think we are all invested in finding ways to include. So multivocality, which is another term that explores plurality without the specifically musical roots, has been unpacked in this case by the composer, filmmaker, and theorist Trinh Minh. She begins sort of with a caution around this concept, the multi being a sort of difficult lineage in terms of vocabulary. Like the much abused concept of multiculturalism, multivocality here could also lead to the bland melting pot type of attitude in which multi means no voice, or is used only to better mask the voice, that very place from where meaning is put together. On the other hand, multivocality can open up to a non-identifiable ground where boundaries are always undone at the same time as they are accordingly assumed. So, how does this help us to to think a bit broadly about today, about the 21st century? So these previous two references to late 20th century modes of breaking from singular hegemonic narration can provide an important context for more recent moves towards the pluralization in the public sphere, as well as in spaces of education and curatorial discourse. So in the 21st century, and very specifically in the last 4 years, we've seen the mainstreaming of ideas that can reorient our collective sort of Enlightenment inheritance of positivism and empiricism, specifically thinking about this mainstreaming of post-humanism, of decolonization, speculative fabulation, and gender creativity. In 2020, many institutions within and beyond the arts shifted to a type of rapid response programming and content publishing to address the urgent need to make space for more diverse voices and spaces of authority, including the NGO Oxfam. So I'm drawing this quote from a work that they produced, which is available free online, looking at the concept of narrative. And part of the provocation for their project is that narratives are a form of power that can mobilize and connect, as well as divide and isolate. Social, public, or dominant narratives help to legitimize existing power relationships, prop them up, or make them seem natural. As an anthology of perspectives, this knowledge offering is only one way to amplify different and diverse ways of knowing and doing narratives. Narratives are made up of many stories, tweets, online content, offline conversations. They keep deeply held ideas about society and people in place for good and bad. So this is just sort of a teaser for those of you that are looking for slightly different sources for thinking about multivocality or about a type of pluralism. So I'll select this one quote from one of the contributors to the anthology that I was just referencing, Nita Lucci, who's an anthropologist and based in Kosovo. It's important to have narratives be as plural as possible, to have many people talking about the same event. Feminist ethics and philosophy excuse me, have helped us to understand the importance of telling narratives and recounting stories from different perspectives and standpoints. So while I don't claim or wish for my own curatorial work to be overtly activist in its stance, and indeed I find that much curatorial work in this vein lacks the depth and polyvocality that would help to foment discussion and actual change, I do think that the incorporation of this vocabulary and some of these methodologies are necessary for the implementation of a truly diverse set of curatorial practices, especially in the relatively antiquated practice of museum-based exhibition making. So to give some more concrete examples of how I've incorporated polyphony into my work as a curator, I will now share a few of my past exhibition projects. I will go relatively quickly through them so that we can move on and eventually get to a discussion. So just to, again, warn you to what you're about to see, there'll be about 4 projects that I'll start with that engage with ceramics, a few group exhibitions in the middle, and then end with 4 new media projects. So to get to some of the images, so I wanted to show this installation shot of an exhibition entitled Jinshin Inclusions, which I curated when I was a curator at the Crow Museum of Asian Art in Dallas, Texas, in 2005. So this was an exhibition project that presented a selection of Shin's work in video installation, photography, and mixed media, which itself was organized to accompany the opening of her commissioned outdoor installation called Celadon Landscape, part of a sculpture garden on the premise of the museum, which itself was nestled in the Dallas Arts District, but also itself the sort of first floor of a corporate office tower. The title of the exhibition draws attention to the inclusive nature of this artist's practice, which relies heavily on accumulating large quantities of material or objects that would otherwise be considered remnants, useless cast-offs, or they would be unnoticed pretty much as garbage. When collecting these materials and giving them new shape and form, Shin also convenes communities and participants, drawing attention to the stories, labor, and history embedded in everyday objects. Her video work, Penumbra, was something that is not visible in these shots, but was to me sort of a key to understanding the work. It was a site-specific sculptural installation at Socrates Sculpture Park in New York, comprised of the fabric stripped from discarded or broken umbrellas gathered from city streets after rainstorms. So essentially the broken umbrellas that didn't make it through the violent winds of that particular rainstorm. These umbrella skins were reconfigured into a canopy-like assemblage installed among the sculpture garden's trees, slightly reminiscent of the fabric remnants reassembled with care in the traditional Korean art of jogapbo, or patchwork wrapping cloths. So the reason why I'm mentioning this while looking at this image of Celadon Landscape is to really think about the nature of things that are discarded, specifically in the realm of Asian art and museology, often specifically outside of Asia. So this is, an Asian art museum that is located in the American South. There is a preciousness that is associated with Asian art, or specifically these sort of fine decorative arts, including Celadon and other forms of porcelain or ceramics. And so I think thinking about Jinshin as an artist whose work can start to raise questions around this sort of the tendency for these objects to be seen as sort of fine, precious, but in many ways sort of innocuous was important. The first image that I had shown you, I wanted to show as a slightly minimal intervention. So we have some of the same Celadon ceramic shards that were used in the large scale installation outdoors that are then sort of rearranged indoors in this very sort of minimalist arrangement. So Jean Shin, as a sort of sculptor artist, really thinks through material and specifically the afterlives of material. So creating a vitrine that is full of shards that are not sort of strewn or allowed to be sort of seen through the chaos of destruction, but rather through the order of the plinth, of the display bonnet, in the context of a very quiet indoor space was an important gesture for me, just to start thinking about, what are the prejudices that the viewers would be bringing to thinking about this material and to perhaps celebrating the form rather than the material. So here's a slightly closer view, and here is yet another sort of slightly closer view, kind of thinking about the horizon line or the sight line that was being composed by this type of material being presented in a museum, which again had a much more historically oriented collection. I will shift to another type of ceramic project. This is from my time as a curator at the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco. It's entitled Collected Letters, an installation by Liu Jianhua, and it was itself a commission. So this is a project where there is, an artist with a very well-known practice in the realm of installation who was specifically commissioned to do this site-specific installation, drawing both on traditions of porcelain. So these are all letters that have been sculpted in porcelain, either letters or radicals of Chinese characters, that are all from Jingdezhen. So the artist Liu Jianhua works with the craftspeople and the artisanal practitioners in Jingdezhen, not just for this exhibition, but for many works in his practice. And so kind of actively interrogating the history of ceramics and of porcelain. For me, it's important to highlight that this type of installation, which itself is kind of interesting, it's thought-provoking, is also more or less permanent. I mean, nothing in this world is permanent, but it is more or less permanently installed in this historical museum in San Francisco, and that there is something to be said for things that are permanent in a world of pop-up or sort of temporary exhibitions. The work that went into installing it was to really rethink the space. This is a space that had not been an art exhibition space before. It had been sort of an interstitial or transit space. So to really redefine that space in a permanent way was significant for me. Also, just a quick note on the title. This is another sort of way of thinking about the collaborations involved in this type of work. The artist himself had a different title in Chinese that he actually asked us to actively sort of work against, to come up with something that would sort of appeal to the audience, essentially an English fluent audience that might not give reference to the title that he had, which was Hunhuti, which is sort of hybridity. But in this case, because we were installing this in a museum that is occupying a former library building, he wanted there to be some sort of literary reference, and we came up with this sort of interesting pun of collected letters. Another moment of thinking about the history of Asian art and specifically ceramics and these sort of delicate, precious things in the context of the museum came a bit later that year in 2016. This was an exhibition that I curated from a large gift of ceramics. So it's a contemporary Japanese ceramics collection that was being gifted in almost its entirety to the museum, which itself is an interesting gesture to give sort of this collection with the impression of the collectors themselves as a sort of museum-worthy gift. It was also an important moment when the museum was sort of actively shifting from having a historically oriented collection with occasional temporary exhibitions that looked into modern or contemporary art, and then shifting to actually collecting and keeping or caring for that work that would become part of the permanent collection. As you can see, these are just sort of two sort of contrasting examples of the type of work. On the top, we have Mihara Ken. On the bottom, we have Kishi Eiko. These are very, very technically savvy, very technically competent artists who have a very different aesthetic, also a very different relationship to ceramics in Japan. But in both cases, they are engaging with this sort of concept of functional ceramics being sort of transitioned to a sculptural context. At the same time, like basically the same week, I opened a much more conceptual project thinking around the ways that artists and other creative people work together as a bit of a metaphor for how people in general can come together in times of crises. So this is a project with the now Kyoto-based artist Koki Tanaka, looking at two of these sort of collective endeavors that he as the artist instigates and then films or documents. So we have, in the first case, a group of 5 ceramicists or potters in China who are brought together to make a work of art, a ceramic work of art together, or a pottery. So I guess it's a bit neutral, not necessarily saying that it would be a work of art. And how do you start to do that? How do you discuss where to start? Who does what, etc. The second project in this same sort of duo exhibition. Yes.
Would 10 more minutes be okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, go ahead.
So the second project is the same sort of premise, but with poets. So this is a group of poets who is brought together in the context of this project, asked to write a poem simultaneously or collaboratively, and seeing the result. So again, trying to think through the issues around objects and then also around ideas and how to sort of bring them together, specifically in this case in a museum context where people are expecting to see objects. Just very briefly, I wanted to share a few of these sort of group shows that I've spent time thinking about how multivocality, polyvocality, and polyphony might come together. This one, Divine Bodies, was another project at the Asian Art Museum where I was a co-curator with 2 other curators. So we already have a bit of the sort of different viewpoints from different curatorial points of view and orientations, but also the concept that each curator would be not working on an area of specialty per se, but in suggesting objects that would be interesting in this conversation. So essentially the premise for this show was thinking about, what is sort of human in the divine and what is divine in humanity. So my contributions focused on sort of lens-based or photographically or video-based projects where people were sort of either overtly or inadvertently addressing issues of sort of longevity, what happens to us when we pass on, etc., in conversation with these very sort of specifically designed objects that had a sacred lineage. Another sort of more recent attempt at thinking through issues of polyvocality and multivocality was this sort of duo solo show, or not duo solo, it was a duo show called Residual, featuring the work of Singapore conceptual artist and performance artist Lee Won, and his sort of slightly younger collaborator and contemporary Jason Lee, thinking about how the artistic friendship, creative kinship of these two, who actually in terms of their art practice have fairly little in common, was itself an important thing to explore. So looking at the objects of each of these practitioners, but also kind of how you can put these things in a productive dialogue. So just in broad strokes, I can tell you that in this shot, the two-dimensional work, the paintings and drawings are all the work of Li Wen, whereas the three-dimensional work is that of Jason Wee. They all have these kind of literary allusions that are being addressed in one way or another. In the same space, so this is another pop-up exhibition commissioned by the Institutum, which is a Singapore-based nonprofit. I curated this exhibition entitled Mountains and Rivers Remain that involved the sort of ink painting of three artists who are in some way a bit outside of the mainstream of contemporary ink or modern and contemporary ink painting. So they all are based somewhere outside of China. In the case of Bing Yi, she's based in Los Angeles, Cheng Ha Qian, based in Kuala Lumpur, and Tang Dawu, very well known as a performance artist who is also a painter and based in Singapore. So thinking about the sort of literati lineage through these people whose practice is all slightly outside of this very, very well-defined lineage. Very, very brief aside, thinking about these sort of non-exhibition ways of bringing people together and thinking about what is a curatorial practice for a very sort of decentered population that might not always be going to physical spaces. I did serve as the host and sort of in-house curator for a podcast series, which, seemed very relevant in 2021 and 2022 when international travel was not happening. In this case, thinking about the creative process of an environmentally oriented furniture designer in Indonesia. But thinking about what is this mode of kind of long form discussion and where does that have a home? And for my mind, I honestly don't know. I feel like the podcast is an answer, but it might not be the best answer. So I'd welcome your thoughts on that as well. All right, so I will shift to a few new media projects just to think very sort of broadly about, whether there are the same stakes involved when you start to focus on sort of the media and the connectivity as opposed to the objects themselves. In this case, this is a project that I did with Harun Mirza. This is again back at the Asian Art Museum in 2018, where his project was to essentially pixelate and read painting and then transpose the reduced color scheme of those pixels to an environment. So a sequence of sounds of live electricity and the basic colors that he assigned to different frequencies of that sound. So really thinking about sort of getting away from materiality, in particular in the context of Islamic art. The painting that he chose to sort of pixelate and scan and then transpose into this multimedia environment was an illustration of the night journey of the Prophet Muhammad on the back of the mythical creature Burak, which is something that does have I don't want to start going into this too much, but it does have an actual visual representation of the Prophet Muhammad. And so this is a painting that is in the collection of the museum, but is not shown on the online database. It's never been shown on public display, just to avoid any potential sort of violent conflicts around the concept of images of the Prophet in Islam. In this case, this is a more recent project in the context of the pandemic, again, Free Jazz 3, which was a series of commissioned sound projects that were designed to be experienced not in an exhibition space, but while walking. So not just at home, but specifically when someone is, with their headphones, but walking out in nature or in an urban environment. And this is sort of a bit more about the diverse types of artists who were invited not just to create works by themselves, but sort of collaboratively in the context of the COVID lockdown, where they were collaborating distantly. Just to bring it back to Trinity Minha, I did want to speak about this exhibition that had been curated by my former director, Uta Mehta-Bauer, the founding director of NTU CCA Singapore. It's happened to be the last exhibition in the CCA exhibition space in Singapore, which was a bit of a retrospective of films that were made by Trinity Minha shown in an exhibition context. So also thinking specifically about what is gained by showing things like films or perhaps other forms of video production that might arguably be video art or film, depending on the context in which they are seen. The very last one that I will share with you is this sort of still ongoing project with Viral Dharma called Landscapes. If you can read the way Landscapes has been rendered in the title, it sort of premiered in early 2022, but it does continue to this day. The sort of multimedia components of it are a bit hard to find. It is a space that does have a physical manifestation. In this case, the sort of vinyl printing on the wall is itself drawn from stock images related to Songket and other textiles associated with the historical Nusantara region. So there's a sort of digital element that is made analog and then glitched manually. So you see the sort of shapes and other ways that the vinyl has been sort of interfered with become the sort of visual and sort of analog manifestation of the sort of post-internet, very glitched culture that we live in. But in this case, the setting, the exhibition, was just a bit of a jumping off point. So it was an environment that was created as an active invitation to have not just sort of programming or educational programming that is about the exhibition or its themes, but just as a venue where people could do assorted other creative projects to bring people together. So we had someone that just held a tarot card reading there. We had mini marts and sort of night markets held there. There's a sort of kid-oriented activity called Dinokinesis. There was a Pilates or a sort of Silat Pilates athletic workshop. So kind of thinking broadly about what is it that space can and should do in the 21st century. And in some cases, I think that it's about sort of creating an environment for the art. And in some cases, I think it's about creating an environment that's really about bringing people together. So I will stop there. Thank you so much for your attention.
Karen, thank you. So rich, yeah, from the conceptual polemics to all those cases of your previous work. So let's move on. We'll have a lot to discuss, but let's move on to our third speaker, Dr. Swatal Patel. He holds a practice-based PhD from Winchester School of Art, University of Southampton, where his thesis was titled Biennale Practices, Making and Sustaining Visual Art Platform. And he's a founder of founding member of Kochi Muziris Biennale in India. And he's both a researcher and writer practicing at the intersections of visual art, exhibition making, and development studies. And also is invited as lecturers at Zurich University of the Art, Royal College of Art, and elsewhere. Okay, so he's going to share with us his thought, very interesting thought, soft power and new Cold Wars, 软实力新冷战. So yeah, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. Just to check, I have 20 minutes. Is that correct?
20 or 30, I said 30 in general, in principle. Yes.
30 minutes. Okay.
Take your time. Yes.
Okay, great. Can everybody hear me clearly? First of all, can you hear
Clear.
me?
Yeah, it's very clear.
Okay, wonderful. I am going to go a little off.
Oh, Shwetal, I think you muted yourself.
1 minute. Right, I just want to share my screen. Do you see what I'm seeing? Hello?
Yes.
Hi, do you see what I'm seeing?
Not now. We saw something just now.
Okay, great. We're going to just try and get this going. And 1 minute. Here we are. Okay. Okay. So can you all see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Great. So I'm also very conscious that I'm going to try and speak slowly because I have a natural habit of speaking very fast. And I've been told on previous
that's
occasions
fine.
Okay.
Just feel free
Okay.
to do your own way. Yes.
Fine. So today my talk was soft power, new Cold Wars, but I'd like to come to that in a little bit. I'm going to go off script, as I said. I'm not going to be speaking from slides. I was going to talk about my latest research, which I think addresses the question of geopolitics. One of the things that I was very interested in was geopolitical history. And of course, that can date back thousands of years, but I think the most relevant period most recently would be around 1500 onwards with the age of European colonialism. And I think that's especially important when we look at current exhibition making trends, curatorial trends, and indeed, you just have to turn your phone on or look at the news to see how present and how worryingly close geopolitical affairs are and how they seem to be impacting, of course, many sectors and aspects of life, but really quite profoundly exhibition making and institutional governance, policies, education, and so on. So I wanted to kind of come to that in the last 5 or 10 minutes of today, but I wanted to give you a little bit of background as to my current research that has just been published alongside Dorothy Richter and Ronald Kolb, Speculations, Funding and Financing Nonprofit Art. And here I've been an editorial board member of On Curating for the last 5 years. Previously, issue number 46, Contemporary Art Biennials Are Hegemonic Machines in Times of Emergency. And prior to that, On Curating 39, which was a global biennial survey, where alongside, again, Dorothy Richter and Ronald Kolb, I looked at the biennials around the world and tried to kind of bring some empirical analysis to the field, because I felt that, of course, there was a lot of theoretical, art historical, and political, especially vis-a-vis post-colonial theory within the framework of literature and biennials, but there was very little empirical data. And that was published in 2018. And the reason we called it Draft Global Biennial Survey is also in recognition that biennials there's no single adjourning body of biennials globally, but they seem to be shape-shifting. Biennials appear, they disappear, they maybe, don't last very long, they change, biennials become triennials. So it's incredibly difficult to really kind of empirically understand biennials, but we thought it was interesting. There are lots of trends that we observed in that edition of On Curating through the research, in particular, the rise of biennials in Asia. And also looking at certain countries, Japan, for instance, China, and several others, South Korea, that have several biennials. It attests to the popularity of the format, especially outside major art centers or capital cities, where there isn't perhaps arts infrastructure or even in some cases, audiences that are initiated to contemporary art, and biennials are started for all sorts of different reasons, both for tourism, but also cultural and artistic, educational, but also to reconcile, in the case of Gwangju, in a way to rehabilitate through moments of trauma or political disruption, as was the case in the Gwangju uprising and the creation of the Gwangju Biennial. And then we followed that up in 2020 with, as I mentioned, contemporary art biennials are hegemonic machines in times of emergency. And this is a quote taken from Oliver Machad, Our Hegemonic Machines in Times of Emergencies, really tried to analyze the biennial phenomenon through looking at various histories of major international exhibitions, but also looking globally, not just at Venice Biennale and Documenta, but also looking at Africa, Latin America, Asia, Southeast Asia, other parts of the world, and seeing how biennials both can be instruments of emancipation, but can also become hegemonic machines. And the third in this series of publications, this one has taken around 3.5 years to put together. We were really, really interested in the funding and financing of nonprofit art. And to Karen's point earlier in her presentation, we felt that the discussion of funding and financing of nonprofit art is largely missing from the discourse. It is often alluded to. It is certainly a perennial preoccupation for exhibition makers, institution, directors, curators, artists themselves. Often spend a great deal of time trying to raise money, filling in application forms, looking after patrons, looking after sponsors, writing press releases, all the things that Karen said earlier, in order to fund and finance exhibitions, to commission artists, to pay artists fees, to finance the biennials, exhibitions, museums, etc. But this is an area which we felt, Ronald and Dorothy and I, wasn't sufficiently explored from academic and research perspective. And so this was a way for us to begin to kind of understand the field. And there's lots of very interesting contributions that we have gathered, including an exhibition itself around economics the blockbuster, which was recently held at the Whitworth in Manchester. We looked at various other aspects of funding exhibitions. For instance, the Dutch Pavilion, the Architecture Biennale for plumbing the system, which actually looked at the financial aspects of architecture and urbanism and how money and financing actually dictates a great deal of what is eventually built. And equally, I would argue that funding and financing really impacts what is shown and what is commissioned and who is invited, who is not invited. And a lot of this research started for me from a very personal perspective from my role as one of the founding members of the Kochi Musris Biennale, a biennale in what some may refer to as the Global South. Some disagree with that term, some simply don't like it, but it's a generally understood term which has a definition which you may search. I also was interested in how institutions in the Global South respond to funding networks, usually from rich European countries that are able to fund artists and artist projects in a way that is not possible for many countries that are still developing, that don't have a more robust or developed arts policy or cultural policy that can support artists, especially artists exhibiting abroad, but of course, artists also being supported in their own countries. We looked at a very interesting piece that I want to mention here by Laura Alexander and Miriam van der Broek, who work for a very important Dutch foundation. Their piece, Forces of Art, Monitoring and Evaluation as a situated knowledge-making practice. And they really argue that actually the way that European foundations select recipients of grants is actually outmoded. The practice of having to write pages and pages of forms actually restricts, in a way, doesn't allow access to many people whose, for instance, English may not be a first language, who may not be au fait with the ways of funding, with certain discourses, language, and so on. And it's a very interesting piece how their foundation is changing how they both monitor and evaluate applications, but also how they understand different kinds of art practices. And when they're making decisions, how they make that process more open and accessible, but also fairer. And I think that's really important. And I'd sort of like you to perhaps in your own time have a look at that, because I think that would explain a lot about some of my preoccupations. And I think especially in relation to exhibition making, as Joyce mentioned, my interests, research interests, the intersection of exhibition making, development, theory, and research. And I'm really interested in the macro picture often, and how it relates to the micro reality, how it is to actually be an organization in the South having to try to constantly fundraise, constantly keep your head above water, in very challenging circumstances, in order to present exhibitions of course, national merit, but international quality. It's a highly challenging, financially intensive exercise. And so I've been at the cold face of having to deal with funding agencies, deal with sponsors, deal with patrons, deal with local government, and so on. And it's given me more questions than I have answers for. And I think this has really been the impetus for a lot of my research, has been thinking about my situation and the work that we do, and the impediments and opportunities and challenges that exist, and how one can kind of perhaps understand them, but theorize them, and hopefully find ways to mitigate some of these challenges and come out of these spaces. I want to now go on very briefly to the Kochi Museus Biennale, which is the first Biennale that was started in India. This is the Google Arts and Culture page. This is a partnership that I initiated with Google back in 2012. We were the first Biennale that they actually came to. If you go to the Google Arts and Culture space, you can actually walk around the Biennale, and you can actually explore using their Street View technology, and I can actually
Settle, we lost you.
It's funny because we didn't lose his screen, but we lost him.
Yeah, right. That takes too much.
And now it's
Yeah.
gone.
Is he coming back? Nancy, could you write to her and see what's going on?
He's probably furiously trying to get back online.
Yeah, sure. It's so difficult to have this technical issue.
Yeah, I
issue.
wrote to him.
Okay.
We just received his note about
Yeah.
his presentation. You got it in your email, Professor Liu.
Yeah, let me see. The notes was sent an hour ago, so he apparently is doing something new. Let's all take a 5 minute break.
Good idea.
Yeah.
So let's take a 5 minute break. After he comes back, we'll start with the discussions, comments. All right. Okay, yeah, you're back.
Yeah.
So let's just start. Let me introduce you our marvelous artist scholar, Huazhen Cai 蔡老师. She actually is a filmmaker and independent filmmaker and received many awards before. But she received her doctorate degree in cinema and media art, University of Chicago. Okay. And she's currently teaching in the Institute of Social Research and Cultural Studies of our university, and focusing on issues related to cinema and media studies, the Frankfurt School theories, theory of gender and sexuality, affects theories, and migration and globalization and contemporary art. So she's had been working on feminist cinema festivals for many years and has a very good collection and building up a huge archive. She has also been working on these female filmmakers for a long time. So Huazhen, would you please just comment on the previous two? I believe all our audience are so interested in this multiple directions of possibilities of curation. Okay, so all right, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you for your invitation, Joyce, and it's my great pleasure to be here. And I feel that I have been given a truly difficult task, though. Yeah, after listening to Wenshu and Karen's truly wonderful talks, in a way, I kind of feel that I need more time to digest, but I will just talk about the thoughts that I had when listening to Wenshu and Karen's presentation. It seems to me that Wenshu and Karen's curatorial work actually create a very interesting conversation about. I will talk about Wenshu's artistic and curatorial work first, because it seems to me that when Professor Wenshu talks about interrogative design as a form of art making, right? And also as a form of social engagement, and also as pedagogy. And I was really struck by her interest in the transient and in ephemeral things, such as lights, and also and also how she actually connects her thinking about, in a way, the impossibility to fix meanings in narratives of history, in a way, right? Because that's her project about the 6 fuel factory in Hsinchu is about, right? She collaborated with her students on, for example, creating the living metaphor and the living museum series. And also, I actually attended Wenshu's project in 2019, I think, and that was the project entitled non-movement, right? And it is in a way a response. Oh, should I continue or should I?
Yes, please continue. I'm very sorry.
Please continue. Yeah, maybe Curatorial can come back later. So just continue your discussion with Wenshu and Karen. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, and I was actually at the event. I think that was probably a winter evening or a fall evening. Yeah, at the 6 fuel factory, they ran and I was really struck by the ways in which, for example, that was at that event, in fact, was a theater, right? A live performance, right? But also AI polling was also involved, right? So I guess I was really fascinated by the tensions that the art show try to create, right? Because for example, if I talk about the show, well, the event specifically, right? The event was actually Professor Wenshu's response, in a way, to the various forms of monuments that have been really, truly established in Taiwan, right? And Wenshu's talk, interestingly, also situates her artistic practice, right, in Taiwan's history, right, from the martial law period to post-martial law period, right? So in a way, the project non-movement was a response to, all those governmental and gigantic monuments being established in Taiwan in the past, right? But on the other hand, I was really curious about, the democratic form or representation that the incorporation of the AI technology was used in that event, because I remember that I also voted, with my cell phones, but every single time my vote was, with the minority, so my vote didn't stand out at all, right? So I was really interested in this incorporation of this modern democratic institution of polling, right, and the artists and curators thinking about history and about the contesting nature of post-war history of Hsinchu and the pre-war, right? The colonial period, Taiwan, and I also remember that in that event, for example, there were actually audience who were really angry, right? So there were different kind of affects involved in those in the event, but those angry moments were actually not recorded in a way, right? So, and I think those moments in a way also, I don't know, sort of create an interesting conversation between how we think about competing histories, right? At a site when, I think the site of Liuran is so interesting because the city of Hsinchu right now, maybe not right now, especially since the outbreak of COVID, right, has been also the center of real estate, right, wounds, right, and so I just wonder how all these factors, would actually come into play, and how, for example, Wen Shu would think about her future involvement with, for example, her future incorporation of technology, since AI now is so, in a way, valorized in a way, right? In Taiwan, right? We are asked to do AI research all the time, even though, some of our works might not related to AI. So I'm just interested in thinking about, for example, if for Wen Shu, I guess that's kind of a question that I have been asking myself as well, right? If we want to think about, and in a way, destabilize history, right, by presenting multiple histories at once, and in a way, that's also part of the project of Professor Wen Shu's really wonderful project around Liuran, by creating living history, and by incorporating, for example, histories of the residents, and also I remember that there was actually a project that involved students raising some chickens, right? Some farms, right? Establishing farms around Liuran, right? So I just wonder how these different forms of interrogating history, right, can be incorporated, but in a way also, not cancel one another. Yeah, I guess it's a really huge question. Yeah, so I'm just curious about it because, I don't really know that much about, the incorporation of AI, but the issue of virtuality is actually very important, right, in contemporary film and media theory. So I'm just wondering how, for example, we can think about the question of virtuality of things and people, right, in relation to the monument, or, in the case of the monument performers, right? How do we think of those things? I don't know. Sorry if I, sounds not very organized. That's because your talks are so wonderful and intellectually stimulating. Yeah, and when Karen was presenting her talk, I was really struck by. I have to say that I really love the Jinxing series, even though I only had this chance to. I only had this glimpse of 2 or 3 pictures, right? And And the title of the series is entitled Inclusions, right? So I was really struck by how I sort of feel Karen's approach to space and to museum as an institutionalized art space in a way, creates a really interesting dialogue with Professor Wen Shu, because Wen Shu's work is Wen Shu's curatorial work is about challenging, right, the museum and the institutionalized art space as, you know, a space of creation, right? So that's why, you know, Liu Ran is so focused in this talk, whereas in Karen's, I especially was struck by Karen's discussion of how innocuous objects are used, right, and are placed in different locations, actually, in different Asian art museums, right? And sometimes in the American South, and sometimes in San Francisco, right? That's collected letters, right? And you two sort of, you know, approach these questions from different directions, but also, you know, try to transform the space, you know, the institutionalized art space in a way, right? And in Karen's case, for example, the Junxing exhibition and the collective letters, right? And those fragmented ceramics, in a way, not only invoke the history of multiculturalism that Xu Mingha nicely critiques, but also invokes the, you know, unspoken and unrepresented labor behind, for example, Jing Dezhen, right, which has a long history, a long economic history of ceramic production that is rarely talked about, right? But it's these shards of ceramics are interestingly transformed into letters, right, in a different form, right, and in a museum space or a space of the gallery, right? And I think Karen's approach of problematize, you know, how we think about the institutionalized space of art, you know, the museum and the art gallery. And then I think I was struck by her words when you said that, you know, you wanted to use those objects to make some transient space permanent, right? So I sort of feel that you actually, you know, are doing similar things in different directions. Yeah, and I was really struck by, you know, how, you know, the thoughts and how you guys actually approach different things and in different locations and thinking about, you know, similar things, but still, you know, with a really different approach. And I was also really interested in Karen's talk about her involvement in creating podcast, right? And also the jazz music and the sound work, because you began your talk by talking about the concept of polyphony, right? And I just wonder, you know, because I didn't really get to know more details, but I would really love to know more about, for example, podcast is something that only exists during maybe the age of the digital, right? And that again brings us back to the question of how we think about polyphony in the digital age, right? And how we think about the materiality of objects and bodies, right? And podcast is something that seems to be more disembodied, right? The sounds of podcasts. Whereas that's also the section when you talk about how you actually bring sort of trying to transform the traditional gallery space, if my memory is correct, by letting people play tarot, right? And I was really struck by that part, because that the kind of everyday practice that is usually, like they usually won't appear in a curator's talk, for example, right? And I sort of feel that that's actually, one of the core of your project, that is to bring out the everydayness of practices, social practices, and in a way, this practices, this non-art practices, in a way, also echo your thinking about how to engage in the concept of polyphony, right? In the art, in the age of global art. Yeah, so that's just my rather random thought about you guys' project, and I just feel that I'm really given a difficult task, and I'm so glad that I have this pleasure to sit here and to listen to your truly wonderful talks, and yeah, so that's it for now.
Okay.
I think
yeah.
I have already talked over time, right?
No, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I think for this round, I would like to involve both Wendy and Karen to also respond to one another, because you really pose as Bajan said, you approach the question seemingly from different direction, but actually you are demonstrating very similar tactic. Like Karen mentioned, there's coexisting layers, multiple layers, polyphony. Okay, but polyphony also direct us to, as you said later on, polyvocality. Vocality that also involve locality, physical bodies. Okay, and those are that of course also different moment, temporal moment. And like Wenshu's work, Wenshu, could you join us for discussion?
Sure.
Oh, yeah,
I'm
right.
here.
Yeah, right.
I'm
And
here.
I also was very moved by in the moment you mentioned that your curatorial work is a long trajectory or a journey to tease out your own puzzles, your own tension between conformity and non-conformity, okay, or the all educational background and information imposed on us, okay, we, the same generation. I might have gone through it more than you. And so we all need to think through, okay, our past, okay, I through writing and you through art. So but your work is not only about this transient moment, but in your museum, okay, this is a military site, right? During the Japanese colonial period, through performance, through projection of this enactment, we also see all different lives, okay, sounds or shadows of different people living through different generations. So there's a polyvocal bodies, okay, but through your curation. It's really marvelous. As I said, I was touched every time I went there, okay, to your exhibition. So do you, the two of you, either respond to Huazhen's comment and then respond to each other? After this round, then we'll follow with Shuaito's presentation, and then we'll come back for more discussion. Okay. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Joyce.
So Karen, would you like to go first?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll just, because I was so inspired by your work as well. I wanted to add something. So yeah, thank you, Huazhen, for the sort of response to these sort of very expansive discussions, and it really was quite a difficult task to ask you to come up with discussion points, but I think you did so beautifully. And I just wanted to sort of specifically mention that so Wenxu, when you were speaking to kind of the motif of interrogative design as a way of seeing, you know, a bit of a through line through these different types of projects and the different hats that you wear, you know, I think not just in order to execute the projects, but to really think through the problems. I think that is perhaps the most significant takeaway for me, is to, you know, thinking about this sort of approach, you know, as an artist who is sort of, you know, not participating in a curatorial space in order to, say, you know, realize or find a venue for your work, but as a way of really trying to find the meaningful interconnections, and that it is sort of participating in a dialogue where, you know, you're able to marshal your work and, you know, specifically the ephemeral materials that you've used in a way that does actively place them in conversation. And that's this sort of beautiful para-curatorial gesture as well, where it's very much about this kind of, you know, creating the space, creating the dialogue that I think is so beautiful. And it's actually quite different from the way many artist curators function, right? Because often an artist curator is essentially occupying this role of like an artist whose materials are the works of other artists. or their own, and that is, you know, itself this very kind of creative gesture, but there still maintains like a very sort of specific viewpoint and a sort of way of seeing how these things go together, that is, you know, sort of in many ways kind of clear, but then also kind of limiting. So in this case, I feel like you've really done a lot of work to figure out how to put things together in a way that is meaningful, but then not limiting, that does allow for these other sort of viewpoints, and specifically for the public to have a type of access. So that resonated quite a lot for me, and I just wanted to mention that as well. Maybe I'll let you take over now.
Okay. Thank you, Huazhen. Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Josie. Okay, I think I grew up in an environment that people always told me what to do. You know, it's kind of a top down. You know, what is the history? What a good girl should be? What a good student should be? So, so here, I would like to hear from different people to talk about history. So instead of giving my own perspective about what is Taiwan's history, or what is the colonial history, I prefer that to invite all the audience or participant to have an opportunity to talk about it. But, you know, the difficult thing is we are not used to give our opinion, you know. So, so here I try to find a way. It's kind of, you know, you can say it's a trap, you know. It's kind of, I design something, and, you know, and invite the audience to come. So, for example, the theater piece, no monument or non-monument, you know. we took out the M and put N, as the first letter, which means actually there's we don't have a World War II monument. And do we need a monument? Do we really need a monument? Because who has the power to erect a monument? I think this is always a difficult question to answer. So actually in November 2019, we have 130 audience come to the theater, but they didn't know that they are going to create a World War II monument. They thought they are coming and to see the performance, but when they sit down and we give them instruction and we start to ask questions one by one, and then they realize actually they need to express their opinion or offer their perspective. So so the whole thing, is not really we are going to build a monument, but what we try to do or what the production team try to offer is to open up a space and allow the ordinary people, the public, to have a chance to think about it. And we know that 1 hour cannot really render a clear picture of Taiwan's history, but we try to provoke the audience. So and Hua Zhen mentioned that some audience got very angry and they stood up and walk out. They said, "No way, we are not going to create a World War II monument just through 17 questions." And actually, this is what I want to see. I want people to get angry, or I want people to challenge why the whole process, 17 questions, and then they have to create a monument. But we all grew up this way. The school always asks us to do this, to do that, and to follow the rule, to follow the game. And I still think now we are all professors, in the university, but we are still required to play the game, right? And we need, we do challenge, but we challenge the game, we challenge the rule, but we still comply to it. I think it's not just about art, it's also about politics, it's also about academia. It's our daily life, I don't know, do I kind of answer the question?
Interesting.
Yeah,
I think that, yes.
Yeah, so I think that there's a very important message I would like to deliver. I think that when we talk about decentralized, but how, we ordinary people, we just a humble person, and how we can confront the authority, the dominant power.
Yeah.
So we have to find, many ways to at least provoke, our colleague, our student, the public. Yeah. Yeah, that's my first round response.
Yeah, maybe that's a good time for us to invite Shuttle to come in again, and let's listen to his presentation. Yeah, and then we continue our discussion. Yeah, please, Shuttle.
Hi, sorry, I'm very embarrassing. I think you lost me at approximately halfway through.
No, when you started this, the second section.
Google Art and Culture.
Yeah, Google Art. Yeah, and culture.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Well, that was okay. Fine. So I'll move on then to the soft power, new Cold Wars, which is the current research. How long do I have, Joyce? I'm aware that I don't want to eat into anybody else's time.
15 to 20 minutes. Would that be okay?
That's fine.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and perhaps share my screen again if I can. It's okay. Let me just read and not complicate matters. So what I was interested in very recently, following the research that we just completed on curating 56, the funding and financing of nonprofit art, really looking at the macro context of how and what is produced and how it becomes, comes into institutions, how things are commissioned, who funds what are the power dynamics within that. And I spoke a little bit about Pierre Bourdieu and Amartya Sen and my abiding interest in sociology and economics, economic development, and power relations between different sections of society and what, according to Bourdieu, dictates taste and therefore cultural production within society. And I was very interested in taking some of these ideas and applying that to my own situation. So continuing from these research interests, I'm currently on the 12th of April at Zurich University of the Arts, I gave a lecture workshop called Soft Power and New Cold Wars. And what I was interested as a starting point was the expansion of BRICS. And BRICS, for those who may not be aware, is a geopolitical grouping of countries consisting of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And in 2023, in South Africa, 6 additional countries were added: Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Iran, and Ethiopia. And I wanted to see this geopolitical grouping from a historical perspective, because anybody looking at these groups of countries will realize that there are lots of antagonisms within this kind of grouping. And clearly that makes cultural cooperation between this group extremely difficult, or let's say fraught. In many cases, it's non-existent. I know very little cultural cooperation, for instance, between Russia and the West currently, or between India and China currently, or certainly between Iran and United Arab Emirates currently. Of course, historically, there would have been cultural exchange, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the beginnings of that cultural exchange from the 15th century onwards in the European colonial project. Clearly, cultural exchange and trade and commerce have gone hand in hand for millennia. But I'm really more interested in the last 2,000 years or so, beginning in last 700 years or so, beginning in the 15th, 14th, and 15th century, when Vasco da Gama, looking for America, takes a turn at the Cape of Good Hope in what is known today as South Africa and discovers a sea route to India. Now, of course, there'd been a land route to Asia, famously through the Silk Route. There's also a maritime Silk Route, which is less well explored, pardon the pun, or let's say in the discourse, but equally lots of trade links going back thousands of years, Indian Ocean and other oceans that led to the exchange of goods and services, but also in this case, ideas and culture and art. In the 15th century, arguably, there were a few countries, Western European countries, the Portuguese, the Dutch, and others that were colonially exploring the global South, as we call it today. But arguably, there was a seismic shift beginning in the beginning of the 20th century with the creation of the United Nations, where for the first time we have, through the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, commonly ratified, most member states at that point signed up to this declaration, although enforcement is lacking. And therefore, although we have a charter on Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there isn't any body at the moment that can actually enforce these human rights on any given country. And we know what's going on in the world today, that geopolitically things are very, very fraught. And I'd like to talk about this particular moment, but through a historical lens. So what I'm essentially saying is, what I'm trying to explore through soft power, new Cold Wars, is to essentially kind of equate the idea of culture and soft power, and look at geopolitics and the role of culture in diplomacy. And I have some questions that I wanted to kind of ask everybody, but before I do that, I'm going to just quickly zip through the text that I'm working on at the moment. So today, as the cultural sector attempts to tackle unprecedented challenges that demand collective multilateral efforts, I'm talking about challenges beyond the scope of art and culture, things like climate change, things like migration. They demand multilateral efforts. The established norms of international cultural relations are undergoing a transformation in an age reminiscent of the Cold War, generally accepted to be between 1947 and 1991. And I want to try and talk about what are the tools that we can use to investigate this political moment at the moment, this multipolar political moment, but also how we can understand the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the limited identity politics within the diversification of the art world today. Now, clearly, contemporary art is not a Western European phenomenon. Today, there are museums coming up all over the world. There's investment in culture. There's pretty well understood relationship between culture and economic development, culture and soft power and diplomacy, and so on. But this is the art system today is being constantly reshaped by this dynamic interplay of multiple soft power moves and hyper-financialization and hyper-connectivity, today being an example of hyper-connectivity. So given these complex and evolving scenarios, how can we speculate on the ethical considerations for practitioners in the field? What this also amounts to, my research, is how society today in the 2020s, all over the world, I would argue, is wrestling with some pretty seismic concepts like belonging, identity, lived experience, heritage, language, names and labels, offense, justice, and self-realization. And of course, I could keep going on. So one of the organizations, of course, these are really big topics, and I want to just kind of bring this back to artistic practice or research practice, and the kind of what I thought Karen spoke about very well, the kind of polyphony of practices that we can kind of maybe interrogate and use to understand not just curatorial practice, but the world at large. And one of the organizations that I've been following is Forensic Architecture, and an organization also at Goldsmiths University, at the University of London in London, called Investigative Commons. Now, the Investigative Commons, and I quote from their website, is an expanded community of practice that includes investigative agencies and reporters, lawyers, activists, whistleblowers, scientists, artists, architects, filmmakers, software developers, and cultural institutions. Amongst us are members of communities, organizations, and individuals who are at the forefront of interconnected struggles. And that last line there, at the forefront of interconnected struggles. And what's interesting here is that artists, architects, filmmakers are listed alongside reporters, lawyers, and activists. And I think this is a very interesting approach, methodological approach, but also tools that one can kind of investigate this multipolar moment. I want to kind of just dial back to history. Now, BRICS summit that was held last year in South Africa added 6 new countries to the geopolitical grouping. Now, this kind of portends to geopolitical cooperation. Now, clearly, this seems more like economic cooperation but it will clearly have a cultural dimension. You can't have world leaders sitting around. If there's no cultural affinity, it's very hard to do business with each other. And although business is being done, it'll definitely have a cultural dimension, but it might not have an artistic dimension. This is quite unlike the G7, where there's a lot of cooperation between G7 countries, between institutions, between ministries of culture, between education programs, people moving, and so on, including the G20. And the non-alignment movement, which I will come to later, also had a cultural dimension. But it seems to me that BRICS does not ostensibly have a cultural dimension at the moment. Now, it's important to think through the lens of intersectionality. And I hope that today that we can talk about how humans and human creativity are in fact shaped by the interaction of different factors. And these interactions often occur within a context of connected systems of power. And this is where my interest in Bourdieu and Sen is also sparked. Now, navigating these power systems, practitioners in the arts like ourselves can often find ourselves being privileged or oppressed, or both at the same time, in multiple ways, including through racism, homophobia, transphobia, sexism, and ableism. Now, I'd like to go back, as I mentioned, to the 15th century and to a pivotal moment for the Europeans in the early colonial period, following the discovery of sea routes to Asia and to the Americas in the 15th century. And cultural policy had been primarily dictated by economic and political considerations rather than artistic or humanist values, I would argue. Of course, the church and religion was a big part of how culture was expanded. Now, the age of modern colonialism begins in 15th century, Vasco da Gama successfully rounding the Cape of Good Hope. And in 1497 to 1499, he completes his first expedition to India, and he becomes the first European to reach Asia directly by sea. And he's later buried in a church in Port Cochin, where the Kochi Biennale takes place in 1524, having died on his third voyage to India. And India at that point, especially what is now Goa and parts of Kerala, were under Portuguese control. In Kerala, there was a slightly different situation where they paid a tax to the king. But in Goa, they ostensibly colonized and in quite barbaric ways exerted control, eradicated local cultures in place of European culture and religion. So following these sea discoveries around the African coast in 1488 and America 1492, Western colonialism can be considered as a political economic phenomena whereby various European monarchies and national governments explored, conquered, settled, and exploited large parts of the world. This, of course, goes hand in hand with cruelties of slavery, and it was mainly Portuguese, British, Spanish, Dutch, and French slave traders. Of course, there were locals involved and there were intermediaries involved in the trading of slaves, but these were principally the main slave traders, and the numbers are horrific, and I won't go into all of that. But clearly, all the wealth that was amassed during that period, all the kind of geopolitical turmoil that was left in that wake did lead to an enrichment of these European countries. And in the mid to late European colonial period, for better part of the 18th and 19th century, international cultural exchange, art education, and art collection were choreographed and controlled by these small group of powerful countries. And, you know, the museums of the West, the great museum, encyclopedic museums are, in a sense, repositories or mausoleums of this fact. Now, going to the 1850s, at the height of the British Empire, and of course, at this moment, when I talk about empire, it sounds like, you know, quite a benevolent system, but 400 million people were forced into empire, and 26 million square kilometers of land is under control from London. Now, Britain's Great Exhibition, and it was called Great Exhibition of the Works of Industries of All Nations, and it was in London's Hyde Park, and it was an exhibition related to works of industries of all nations. But records show that it did have a cultural component, even if by today's standards, those would be unacceptable, including having human specimens from different parts of the world to show how natives in the empire lived. And the Venice Biennale, a cauldron of geopolitics, I might argue, both today and historically during its formation in the 20th century, is very much has its progeny in the Great Exhibition of 1851. And in fact, it is King Umberto of Savoy and his wife, in an attempt to revive the fortunes of Venice following the Napoleonic defeat in the end of the 18th century. Venice is on its knees, its cholera ridden, the merchants and the aristocracy have left, and all that is left is a kind of crumbling, decaying, once jewel-like citadel in the sea. And in order to kind of revive Venice's fortunes, there is this idea that we will create an international exposition of art, or for shorthand, La Biennale di Venezia, where initially it was more like a trade fair. Belgium, one of the great...
Could you wrap up 5 minutes? We still need time to discussion. Yeah,
absolutely.
People would like to discuss your view on curation in this.
Totally, absolutely.
Yeah.
So just, I mean, really zip through now in the next 5 minutes. If you look at the early countries that were given pavilion status at the Venice Biennale, the first being Belgium, second being, Bavaria, France, Germany. These were all great colonial powers. It's by no accident that these are the first countries that enter into the what we now call the Giardini. There's a second wave of countries that are invited into the Giardini. These are newly minted countries after the Second World War: Yugoslavia, Egypt, Venezuela, and so on. Between the First and Second World War, there was a reconfiguration of these colonial holdings, as I would call them, and there was a new era of nation building. And alongside this was the creation of the United Nations and the ratification of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Until this day, it is the only widely ratified agreement on what constitutes human rights. And in fact, this forms the basis of many, many countries' own formulations of their own internal human rights. As I mentioned earlier, enforcement is extremely difficult. And of course, there are criminal courts in places like The Hague, but there isn't generally a way that we can really enforce human rights. Movement in the 1950s, this was a grouping of countries with 55% of the world's population, that represented 55% of the world's population. People like Jawaharlal Nehru, Zhu Enlil, the Premier of China, working together. Sino-Indian relations for Panchil, which talks about restraint. And moving to the Cold War period, where there's a bipolar world between the Soviet Union and America. At the end of the 80s, where we gradually get to a unipolar world. And I argue that today we're still in a unipolar world, although it does seem that with a rising Asia, in particular a rising China, we may be headed for a bipolar world. Within this context of geopolitical groupings and geopolitics, what does this portend for human rights? And this is a really open question. But I want to just now finish on some questions that I don't think have any easy answers. Should there be a global charter on artists and artist sector workers' rights? Is an artist from Berlin worth supporting more than an artist from Benin? Who should draft a charter? In what language, in what legal jurisdiction should it reside? And how would a charter such as this, which protects human rights and worker conditions, be enforced against bad practices? Do cultural boycotts work? Do they really help? Because on one hand, a humanist position would say that culture should transcend politics and that through art and creativity, we should be able to overcome our differences. But from a geopolitical framing, if you can't travel somewhere, if you're being boycotted, how do you do that? Should museums be free? And if they aren't free, where should the additional income be best generated? Should be sponsorship, from donations, from merchandise, from the gift shop, from sales? And to what extent is cultural exchange a form of diplomacy? And should the Venice Biennale Giardini be reconfigured? Now, these are very broad questions that I hopefully can kind of incite some answers. Sometimes biennales swap pavilions with each other. Does this go far enough? Should there be a loan to some of these former colonies? The Dutch Pavilion at the Venice Biennale is recently showing art of Congolese artists. There's been cases earlier of that happening. Should there be a long-term lease of that case to artists from Congo? And can art help alleviate human suffering in conflict zones? And what are the roles and responsibilities of art practitioners? And finally, to what extent is the application of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights applicable to arts in general? So these are very big questions, but I wanted to discuss this within the frame of geopolitics, because what you will see coming out of the reporting and the criticism that's coming out of the Venice Biennale this year is, on the one hand, greater representation from art and artists from around the world, a real focus on art of the global south, let's say, but at the same time, very apparent geopolitical fault lines, to the extent where certain pavilions are being closed, certain artists and countries are being boycotted very openly. So these are some of the things that I wanted to bring to the table today. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Swato. I think we need to, this will be too much for Huazhen to comment. Huazhen, would you like? to say some words?
Yeah, that's quite a difficult project. I guess I'll just talk about something that came to my mind about the politics of biennial, especially, Venice Biennial. I was really interested in, how, for example, arts from Asia, right, and non-European art in a way, right, usually has to get nationalized in a way, right, in these international biennials. And I wonder, it's an open question for, for Joyce as well. I wonder how you will think about it, and how, for example, Shweta would think about it, right? Because you talk about the colonial history of art exhibition in a way, right? And I was also thinking about the proliferation of biennial in a way. But for example, now Taipei has a Taipei biennial, right? But interestingly, every time when the artist who get to represent Taiwan in the Venice Biennial is picked, there will be controversies, right? Whereas, when Taipei creates its own biennial, it's usually, international curators who are invited to curate something, right? For the Taipei Biennial. So I'm just, I'm trying to be a little bit provocative in a way, given, the difficult.
Yeah, sure. Let's
that I'm
open
given,
up.
yeah.
Let's open up the floor and ask people also join us for the discussion. And Karen should come, and Wendy too. Yeah, and let's first comment on Shuttle's question. Okay, and then we open up for the floor to raise their question. Okay. But I just came back from the Rhodes Island, Greece, and they said that last year or the year before, they had a ceremony of some festival celebrating the renewed union of the two, maybe fingers or palms of one artist. Okay. One was kept in maybe London, UK, and the other one was in Rouf's, France. And they came to this location where it was taken away for that brief, maybe week-long celebration. And then each of them were taken back to that. So that's all museums are a record of their brutality in the past. It's clear. It's clear. So how can contemporary art or biennale vessel, maybe not in the same way to grab other people's limbs or heads and other things, but their creativity in some way. But I'm speaking too fast on that. But I want Karen, can you comment on Suato's questions? But also I want to know more about Suato, your own opinion. How do you, through curatorial practice, address this issue? Okay, you are talking about there's a colonial past and also this contemporary the BRIC, and those are strong powers. They are not less evil than the US and the USSR. Each of those strong power, they have their own capitalist powers, their own accumulation of capital in their own way. Okay, so soft power in what way? Can artists trust their non-alignment movement by all those lesser strong powers? I'm suspicious about it. I don't know what do you have in mind. Yeah. But anyway, Karen, you know more?
Sure.
Yeah,
I mean,
go
I'll
ahead.
try. Thank you, Shwetal, for bringing up these points and the sort of larger geopolitical context, not just of our immediate time, but of these past, 7 centuries or so that really have, created this type of power dynamic that is playing out in all of the individual projects that we're talking about. I guess, maybe to take up your last question on the sort of questions around the, charter for artists and artists workers' rights, and, what does that even look like? How does that become a global conversation? I think, that speaks to what we've not yet really had a chance to discuss in the context of this seminar, because we're thinking very broadly about curatorial practice and sort of the impact of a type of curation or curatorial gesture on, both the art and the public that is meant to experience the art through this gesture of curation. But, we've not talked about how it can only, actually be effective in a more fleshed out ecosystem. And the ecosystem involves, many other independent actors that have a way of populating the ecosystem with the sort of multiple entities that are required for it to be healthy, right? So it's like you have, in many cases, you did the sort of contrast of an artist working in Berlin, artist working in Benin. One of the big differences in that ecosystem is critical writing, and the idea of a critical ecosystem that itself is also related to an art market, that is also related to a type of, arts integration into an education system, not just an arts education, but sort of a general education system. And so it's interesting because the charter itself would have to address these fundamental differences or inequalities. And, does an artist working in Benin, basically have a human right to a type of critical discourse, which, I think, as you've said, the BRICS project doesn't really have an overt cultural dimension at the moment. And in some ways, it's being sort of occupied by the arts and cultural workers who are doing art and curatorial projects in those same spheres, although not in an official capacity. And so I guess this is something that I'm thinking about myself quite a lot as well, is that what are the ways that the ecosystem that can only be healthy if it comes from assorted independent actors? Like, it shouldn't have a sort of state level or even, sort of higher supranational level organization that sort of puts people into these different compartments. There has to be a sort of chaotic wildness about it for there to really be a way for the network to develop. And so then on that side, it's kind of what could a charter as this sort of metaphorical device offer in terms of sort of making space for these other actors. So neither the artists nor the curators. And, I think bringing it back to your point about the sort of fundamental inequalities related to fundraising, I think that is also something that is an important part of understanding what is the sort of access or the right for someone to be able to realize their work. It's usually dependent upon a type of favor, a type of access to capital. And, is that something that should be actively sort of manipulated in one way or another, or do we allow this sort of capitalist or neoliberal logic to remain, where it's sort of this environment where it is almost a survival of the fittest, where people who are able to access the resources they need are then able to survive and continue to make their work. So just a few reactions and points. I don't know that it's a real response.
Yeah, sure. Wendy, would you like to address? Do you need sponsorship? Wendy, she tried very hard every year, I know, but she needs a huge money for her project. So each time she had to work out.
Well, and again, it's sort of the critics, the journalists, they are the ones who sort of inadvertently might amplify your message, but it's like, where do those people factor into your work as well?
Yeah. Actually, I think I'm quite happy to work with the Six Fuel Factory project because it's not a white box. I think a lot about the white box, and sometimes white box means it has a certain political ideology. So the opportunity to do a lot of curation or art performance for the Fuel Factory, when we just started the project, actually there's no water, no electricity, nothing. So when we do the theater piece, we have to bring our own electricity. But since there is nothing, so which means we can do everything. So we set the rule. So I don't know. So I try to stay away from white box consciously. I don't know. So my approach is a little bit different. I think I'm happy to be marginal, minority, in a sense, Okay, so I don't know.
As you were speaking, I just realized that a white cube without light is not a white cube. It's a gray or black cube, which is itself kind of an interesting twist on that politicized space.
Yeah.
If I may add,
sure,
something.
Please. I was actually
It's
thinking
quite,
to ask you. Yeah.
Yeah, so there was, it's not a newspaper I read, admittedly, the New York Times, but from time to time, I do look at it. There was an article, I think came out a couple of days ago on April 24th. So yeah, 5 days ago, titled "The Venice Biennale and the Art of Turning Backward." And the byline is, every art institution now speaks of progress, justice, transformation. But what if all these words hide a more old-fashioned aim? And it goes on to say, there's a sour tendency in cultural politics today, a growing gap between speaking about the world and acting in it. In the domain of rhetoric, everyone has grown gifted at pulling back the curtain. An elegant museum gallery is actually a record of imperial violence. A symphony orchestra is a site of elitism and exploitation. these critiques can now deliver without trying. But when it comes to making anything new, we are gripped by a near total inertia. We are losing faith with so many institutions of culture and society, the museum, the market, and especially this week, the university, but cannot imagine an exit from them. We throw bricks with abandon, we lay them with difficulty, if at all. We engage in perpetual protest, but seem unable to channel it into anything concrete. So we spin around, we circle, and maybe we start going backward. I was quite moved by this because I don't agree with the New York Times on many things, but some of its art writing from time to time, certainly from a kind of American viewpoint, can be interesting to note. And I'm interested to note this piece, although I don't agree with it in its entirety. This one section I thought was interesting because I see this phenomenon play out in many other parts of the world. This is not an American problem alone. I often find that the gap, as it says here, between speaking or thinking about things and acting within the world as a practitioner is yawning. And that's why the current research that I'm doing on soft power and Cold Wars actually takes a historical perspective, because I often find that, especially with some of the students that I interact with, but also with artists and curators that I interact with, that the historical precedents that has sort of led us to this moment are kind of misunderstood. That if history is complicated, our understanding of history is even more complicated because it's something that we project and we recycle in our minds. So in a way, there are no answers to some of these very complicated issues, except that we have to kind of work through them. That's the only option we have. And therefore, we come back to our practices, if we can call it that. And how do we kind of, through our practice, kind of, tackle some of these issues, both within our personal lives, but also then within the professional sphere. And I think the two are interrelated. And so in Zurich, I was asked, well, okay, fine, you've given us this historical overview and you've said it's complicated, but what is your advice to a curator? And I hadn't really got that far, and I didn't really want to kind of prescribe any one method, because I think practice in and of itself is very personal, iterative, and, socially contextualized phenomenon. It is not something that can be, applied across the board and can be, certainly not across cultures and time zones. But what I would say is, from a humanist perspective, as I understand it, without getting into any complicated philosophy, I do believe that human-to-human contact has the possibility to alleviate or mitigate challenges. Often is the case where I meet people that I've heard things about, where I've been told people from that country or even people from that side of town are not people that you should be speaking to or hanging out with. And actually, you might meet somebody, you might interact with them. Certainly as creative people, we find ways of communicating. If there's a language barrier, we find ways around that. If there isn't a language barrier, we maybe share a beer, we maybe share a coffee together, or a cup of tea, and we find some common humanity. And I think that is the space in which we can build on. That is, I think, different to a kind of geopolitical space. If I was an institution being funded by governments, being funded by sponsors, being funded by patrons who all have their own interests and policies and directives under which that funding is given, it makes my position extremely complicated, because now I have to navigate lots of other concerns that are beyond human concerns, what I feel personally, my empathy that I may feel towards somebody else that I may encounter, now has to be kind of worked through the lens of these other structures, power structures, financial, political, and so on. So I think there are two very different positions, and I would err always on the side of the humanist position, but we have to understand that there are power structures in which we operate inevitably that will undermine, or in some cases try and eradicate some of these impulses.
Let me join now. I hope our student can, or participants can share your thoughts and ideas with us. But I think I shared with you last time when I visited your university and what we did in our school. We, of course, government sponsored, right? And we applied for Ministry of Education's budget, but very difficult. Every year, it's a very limited budget, but we managed to offer as an umbrella for colleagues and students, especially our students. They have different ways of doing their curatorial practices, like magazine, like what you did. The student, they for example, Nancy was one of them this year. Okay, we supported them. They have a group of students from China, that from different cities. They work on 自出版 auto printing, self printing. That is, without serial numbers, they don't need to be censored. They don't need to go through the censorship or evaluation turned down, and so on. So they print it and they sell it at bar, at a restaurant, different different music stores and so on. So we encourage them to interview those people and to get as much as copies, and so that they can do their exhibition, but also to write up maybe zine, the electronic zine, so for people to know more. And next year we might do things for Hong Kong, the other time maybe Malaysia. So, but similar curations can be done on, for example, People Theater I mentioned, but there are other things. So among students, they, of course, they need money. They even need money for their tuition fee and living expenses. But the least we could do is to support through this very, I think, even with governmental budget or this Bureau of Cultural Department, like Wensu got sometimes huge money, sometimes very limited, right? Sometimes a big entrepreneur came up and say they want to help, but they disappear, right? I don't know. But I also was wondering, where are all those rich people? And I'm not the person, I just don't have the personality to really ask for money. So, but we just write a proposal and everything and try to manage. And all the students might be a great curator in the future, okay, in different parts of the world, different city. Yeah, Karen, you can share something with us. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And I'm Colin Chen. I'm, can you hear me? All right?
Yes, yeah. Very clear.
I'm postdoctoral fellow at ICCS right now. And I'm also the project manager for of TARN that Professor Liu just mentioned at the beginning of this seminar. And I have a few things I would like to share with Dr. Patel. And this, because at the first of your talk that you shared us that the recent issue of about the speculation, funding, and finance in nonprofit art, I'm very impressed because this is the core. Because I myself study the modern inter-Asia modern theater during the Cold War time. I mean the last Cold War time. But actually, funding and finance is the core issue, whether it is the recent Cold War time or the last Cold War time. Yeah, it means a lot. And at the time, during the 1980s, or 70s, there's a lot of Taiwanese artists and also Taiwanese scholars have been funded by but at the time only one side of the Cold War, it means the United States. And then the whole, including the cultural, artistic, and also ideological thinking has been influenced by that kind of, you can say, geopolitical or political, economical influence. So I think the funding and finance actually is the core, the material core for the pragmatics. And the other thing that I would like to share is that about 10 years ago, Guangxin Chen Guangxin, once tried to campaign in so-called the Inter-Asia Biennale. Okay, it's some sort of, it's not really an exhibition. It's more like a shadow cabinet. To following Taipei Biennale, to hunting Taipei Biennale, and or maybe being the side of Taipei Biennale, and to form more forums, more dialogue, and to talk about Taipei Biennale. Yeah, so 10 years ago, I and my colleagues, we were one of the group. And so we participate, we make a lot of our reflection on the Taipei Biennales. And I think at the time is Nikolai Bukio for the Taipei Biennale. And then talk about a lot about in Europe, how they think about the accelerationism, and then but in the counterpart, and as a shadow cabinet that we make our statement from the Inter-Asia region, how we cannot accelerate. We have been forced to accelerate, things like that. But unfortunately, it's just because lack of funding and financing is just a one-time event. And we cannot proceed. But this is some sort of a strategy that to through some kind of a shadow cabinet and to follow every different kind of regional biennales, and then to make a different sound, a polyphonic like composition. Yeah, because I think that you raise a very fundamental geopolitical and political economical questions. The funding and financing is still we sometimes reluctant to talk about capital, to talk about money, to talk about funding, but it's very essential. And someone who got the chance to have been granted would have the chance to voice out. For example, we know that last week, there's I think there's an Israeli artist in Venezia still protesting that she would not open, I'm not sure, the one would not open the show until the Hamas release all the hostage. Yeah, this artist would have the voice to talk about this. But where's the Palestinian? Yeah, and who have the right to get into, for example, in Taiwan, we talk about it so many times. Who have the right to get into the Venezia? Yeah. So that is just my thoughts and my experience that I would like to share. That it's actually a very Cold War scenario. Thank you.
Other comments from the floor, from students, participants? Just raise your hand.
I have a brief comment for
please.
Wenshu. Yeah, I just want to, give a shout out to Wenshu because I really love your work on the sixth floor factory, because it seems to me that it is more like a tree in a way, and because I think in the beginning, as you said, it was nothing, right? Then every year, the project evolves in a way, and sometimes something organic just comes out, right? And you also show us a picture, of a student, of 3 students, I think, right? Singing and playing guitar at the space. And I love that picture, and I think that's really the importance of your work on Liu Ran, because sometimes when a tree grows and there will be a branch or 2, right, that grow unexpectedly at, in some places that we didn't expect. And I think that's really, in a way, the core of your project, right, about how to think about the colonial history and the history of Taiwan or of Hsinchu in particular, right? And that in that very location, so just some thoughts.
Yeah, Wensu loved to collect stones and seeds from different places wherever she traveled. I would say that every one of us could be the seed for other people, for a student, okay, for the community. And our students, when they go back to Hong Kong, China, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia, Philippines, they will bring changes to their society. So that is what I am thinking the role of an educator in school. Okay, so when people are there, the magnetic field will change. Like when Wenshu is here, and those people, the students who work with him, I also saw the curation of her student work. Okay, and amazing work. So many things happen. Okay, so this group of students, they will come up with other different projects. Okay, they will go out with other people and so on. So you don't need to go to Biennale. People will go up to you. I think locally, the locality power, historical, that is a geopolitical issue. Okay, the historical forces work on us, and we will address these issues. Okay, so yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Hua Zhen, thank you, Joyce, and thank you, everyone. I think I try to, if art making or curation is a soft power, okay, and I think I kind of what I do right now is actually I treat those my curation, the whole project that I have been done so far as an offering to our history. It's not gifts, it's offering. And I hope someday what we do here, actually are seeds, and they will grow as trees. So that's why I invite my students to work closely with me, because I always told my students, you are the next person to take over my job.
Yeah. We need our new generations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other words, Karen.
I actually have
sure, please. Yeah,
sorry,
go
I have
ahead.
a question for Karen, because I remember you said that you mentioned that you were in New York City, right? In the age of the culture wars, right? And now you are back in New York City again. And now, as we know, they are actually student movements, right? At Columbia and NYU. And so I just wonder how, for example, this significant event affect, they do affect, right? And I guess I was just really intrigued by, the unusual trajectory of your work, right? Both in your curatorial practices and also now you are back in New York again, and you have this, interesting collapsing of temporality and your experience and memory of New York, right, in this space. So I just wonder how that might affect your thinking about creating polyphonic exhibition, and also, while at the same time questioning the very concept of exhibition itself, right?
Yeah,
and also
thank you for
working
the
within the
question.
institution of art itself, right? So
Yeah, no. So I mean, it's interesting because I am a diasporic New Yorker, I suppose. So it's, I sort of came up through the New York art world, but then actually made a very specific choice to practice elsewhere as a curator, to sort of be a bit on the periphery. At first in other places in the US, and Boston and Texas and California, and then now being based in Singapore. And I do think that it is important to sort of see how this landscape has shifted just these past 20 odd years, that I feel like the sort of strong capitals have dissolved a bit. And, the sort of Biennale phenomenon is probably part of that, where there are, these other sort of loci of cultural production, and not even just sort of the places where art is being sort of made and discussed, but sort of the view from these non-central locations has become increasingly important. But that being said, as you say, these sort of vibrant cultural capitals, and New York being one of them, are still sort of, in many ways, quite important, quite central, and also evolving and changing. And so I think the mode in which the type of cultural conflict can play out really has fundamentally changed. And this is largely due to a type of, activist mindset that young people and young artists have that they just didn't in the 90s. I mean, I think about it, in the 90s, it was like sort of rare to have a solo show by a woman artist. The sort of diversification of the art world just hadn't happened. And so we were talking a bit earlier about trees, and the idea that, we can all kind of seed and create these branches that are a bit sort of separate from the central trunk structure. I feel like previously, and especially in that mode of, the sort of cultural capital that New York was in the 90s when I was first coming up, like that was a banyan tree. So it was a tree that sort of strangled life around it and prevented the growth of others. So especially as a young person, it was something that I understood was going to be an uphill battle, that if I wanted to practice in that context, it would be, sort of almost like winning the lottery, right? It's like there are so few spots, and you do have to kind of conform to the things that are already happening. So I feel like that is a very different thing that has happened now, where there's much more of a sort of grassroots level of working. That being said, I think there's also a lot of economic factors that continue to be a challenge, especially in places like New York, where artists, might want to live and work because there is a cultural community, but they also cannot afford to live and work. It can, maybe make it all work out by having a few jobs, an active community of practice that might be able to share resources. But then these other things, like being able to actually travel and sort of see what's happening beyond your sort of immediate sphere, are really quite challenging. And I think perhaps more so now than they were 20 years ago. So I guess that's one way of kind of seeing the sort of evolution of, this one place as a sort of simultaneously very parochial and local location, and a kind of pinpoint on the global art map.
Seto, you want to join? We are slowly closing. Yeah, Seto, please.
No, I just want to thank everybody. I mean, I think clearly these are really, really big topics. Whilst I was speaking of the historical, Karen and Wendy speaking of the current moment, and I think that it's always good to kind of oscillate between a kind of grand historical sweep and the lives that we're living and we're being forced to live, and what we're being forced to confront. So that's my only kind of concluding observation. I think that that's why I'm a keen student of history, but I'm also a keen study of the world as it is today, because
sure.
I think that
Same
both
here.
things are important.
Every one of us as a scholar.
But I
we need to do
also
it.
must
Yeah.
maybe end on a what I would say, for me, optimistic or positive or humanist note, to say that, you know, this too shall pass, not to be, as Karen said, smug or, you know, flippant about where we are. But I do believe, especially us in the arts, which is a big us and a big arts, but I hope that we do find ways to communicate poetically and conceptually, you know, reconfigure the world. And I saw it on Wendy's slide earlier as well, this notion of exhibition making as world making, or as Okuyen Wezor said, you know, a will to globality. So I do believe in that, and that's what keeps me motivated.
Very good. Very good. Karen, you have some more thing to say? No. I think it's a good remark to close. So we do need some positive. I think we all are as artists and also educators. We tend to be optimistic. Okay, even though when we study, we tend to be pessimistic, so that we face reality. But we keep doing this because we are optimistic. But I think today, every one of us, including our friends in the cloud, we see that the free form of art making, curation, okay, they are so diverse, okay, and it needs courage. Of course, it needs money, sponsor, and funding, but we don't need much. Okay, we just need to find forms and ways to say and express what we want to say. Okay, and gradually we'll meet people of the like mind, and we will work on bigger projects and so on. So I believe all the three speakers have given us a lot of courage and inspiration, okay, and also think so diversely. And either Wensu or Swato, but also this polyvocality, polyvocal. It's so fascinating. Okay, and I also like Huaten's comments, especially I like her photo in the back. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for staying with us. This is marvelous online forum. Okay, we will do similar things very soon. Okay, in the coming weeks, we will also have invited two documentary filmmakers. We screen their film, and we will have their conversation and so on. Just like what we did for this Palestinian documentary filmmaker and forum. So all this will be continued. Okay. So stay tuned. This is not me. This is not me.
Thank you. Very nice meeting you.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Enjoy
Bye.
life. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Mm.